What if your grandmother looked 25 smoked cigars in space and beat you at VR tennis every Sunday? Welcome to What If Horizons, where science, satire, and the absurd hold hands and skip merrily into the hypothetical unknown. Today's episode plunges face first into the eternal wrinkle-free fantasy. What if aging was optional? Not slowed down, not reversed. Just politely decline like a bad Tinder date. Imagine a world where you reach 30 and simply decide, no thanks, I'll stay like this, and your cells obediently freeze in that perfect equilibrium of youth, grace, and back pain that is only occasional. First, let us ask the burning biological question, why do we age in the first place? Well, it turns out our bodies are slightly lazy traders. Cells divide, DNA replicates, and over time, small errors creep in, like a copy of a copy of a copy of a coffee-stained tax form. Telomeres, those charming shoelace tips on our chromosomes, get shorter with each division, until eventually your cells just throw in the towel and say, I'm out. Aging is fundamentally a result of cellular wear and tear combined with the biological equivalent of Windows 95 refusing to update. But what if we crack the code? Suppose scientists unlock the holy grail of biotech, the ability to pause cellular aging at will. Not a temporary boost like Botox or a facelift held together with surgical optimism, but a true halt to the biological clock. At 30, you check a box, and boom, your telomeres get a VIP pass to eternal youth. The implications? Oh, where do we begin? First, let's talk economics. A society where people do not age naturally shatters every structure we currently know. Pensions? Out the window. Retirement? Optional. Social Security becomes a punchline. If the workforce never wrinkles, never tires, never retires, then congratulations, you're competing for that entry-level marketing job with a 112-year-old who was personally mentored by Don Draper. Imagine a boardroom where the CEO has been empowered since rotary phones were the hot new thing, and now they're still pulling 16-hour days with the agility of a teenager on espresso. Job markets would become an ageless Thunderdome, and upward mobility. Let's just say your career ladder would be more like a smooth marble wall covered in baby oil. But wait, you protest. What about overpopulation? Glad you asked. If people stop dying and still keep having babies because we would not want a toddler at 187, the earth would become a packed concert hall where nobody ever leaves. Cities would bulge, resources would vanish faster than pizza at a dorm party, and we would have to start building vertical underwater metropolises or colonize the moon just to have elbow room. Yet here's where human creativity shines. In a world where aging is optional, perhaps reproduction becomes less desirable. After all, if you can stay young forever, why endure sleepless nights and projectile baby fluids just to create more competition for your beachfront property? Society might naturally shift to a child-free immortality culture, where having kids is seen as an eccentric hobby, like raising pigeons or collecting Beanie Babies. Culture, too, would morph in weird ways. Think about music. Would trends still evolve if the same people still loved disco for 3 centuries straight? Would Elvis impersonators become so good they actually are Elvis? Would teenagers still exist if everyone decided to lock their age at 23 forever? You could date someone who has been 29 for 80 years and still insist that Spotify is ruining the industry. Even relationships would get hilariously complicated. Imagine meeting someone at a bar who looks like a hot 20-something, only to discover they were born before the Titanic sank. Yeah, I've lived through 6 pandemics and 3 Taylor Swift eras, they say while sipping a mojito and scrolling through neural implants of the Great Depression. Romance would become a multi-generational game of emotional Russian roulette. The cosmetic and fashion industries would panic. If nobody ages, who needs anti-wrinkle creams, age-defying serums, or youth-enhancing yoga pants? On the upside, dermatologists would finally get to relax. On the downside, plastic surgeons might be seen wandering the streets, wistfully longing for saggy jowls to fix. Time itself would lose meaning. Birthdays? Obsolete. Age-based milestones? Meaningless. Sweet 16, over the hill. Retirement parties, all gone. The only parties that matter now are, hey, I just finished my 47th master's degree, or guess who finally learned Mandarin after 200 years of procrastinating? People would have lifespans to explore 10 careers, 30 hobbies for existential crises, and still be bored enough to take up underwater basket weaving. Yet, for all the wonders eternal youth might offer, we must not ignore the psychological toll. If aging stops, does emotional growth stall too? Or do we become ancient toddlers trapped in eternally smooth skin suits? Would we still seek meaning, or would ennui set in after the 200th year of brunching? Existential burnout could become the new midlife crisis. Therapists would have waiting lists stretching into the next century. So tell me again, says the ageless therapist with lavender hair, why exactly do you feel sad after 300 years of Tinder? Ultimately, the option to avoid aging might sound like utopia, but humanity has a way of turning even paradise into a bureaucratic mess wrapped in ethical confusion and served with a side of ironic disaster. Still, the fantasy remains. The choice to never wrinkle, never fade, to live indefinitely in the peak of youth. It is tantalizing, terrifying, and totally irresistible. And we have only just begun to dive into the depths of what this hypothetical world could become. Imagine the world if every birthday past 30 came with a menu. Would you like to continue aging naturally, slow it down to a dignified glacial pace, or stop altogether and freeze your face at its peak duck-lipped selfie era? Because in this alternate reality, aging is no longer a biological certainty. It is a lifestyle choice, like CrossFit or eating kale. We are diving headfirst into the sea of eternal youth, where Botox is obsolete, midlife crises are now optional, and death just has to work a bit harder to be convincing. The first thing that happens when aging becomes optional is economic panic dressed up as innovation. Entire industries collapse overnight. The skincare sector? Bankrupt. All those miracle anti-aging serums made of snail slime and ground unicorn horn? Gone. Cosmetic surgeons are seen on street corners holding signs that read, "We'll lift faces for food." Retirement homes turn into luxury spas for those weirdos who still choose to age out of nostalgia or masochism. The stock market readjusts to reflect the new normal, companies betting on the immortality economy boom, while funeral parlors and coffin makers try rebranding as eternal rest experience consultants. But the cultural impact goes deeper than even the finest wrinkle-reducing cream. Aging has long been the story arc of human dignity. The story arc of human dignity. The slow burn from youthful idiocy to wise irrelevance gave life meaning. Without aging, how do you know when to start yelling at kids to get off your lawn? How can you be a wise old crone or a grumpy silver fox when everyone looks like a TikTok influencer forever? Literature collapses. No one wants to read coming-of-age stories if you never actually come of age. Biographies become endless sagas of people just doing stuff indefinitely. Jane Austen plots fall apart because Mr. Darcy never gets old and has to settle down. In fact, no one settles down anymore. Why commit when you have eternity to swipe left? Relationships become more temporary than ever. Dating apps introduce settings like interested in short-term love, under 200 years, and immortality buddy. Marriage vows get revised from till death do us part to till one of us opts into entropy. Even parenting loses its traditional arc. Parents now look the same age as their kids, and arguments devolve into hair-pulling contests over who has the better TikTok following. But not everyone is excited. Some people, particularly those who remember dial-up internet or VHS tapes, feel uneasy. There is nostalgia for the creak of aging knees, the gravitas of a gray beard, the melancholic poetry of time's passage. Aging gave structure to chaos. It told us where we were on the map of life. Without it, we are all just floating around in an endless now, trying to figure out whether we're still on schedule or have overslept by a decade. Meanwhile, governments try to legislate the chaos. Should you be allowed to vote forever if you never die? What about presidents? Do term limits apply if your cells stay perpetually fresh? Is it ethical for a 180-year-old tech bro to date a 19-year-old who also happens to be 96 biologically but paused aging at 19? The legal system starts to resemble a sci-fi writer's workshop. Philosophers, once used to pondering slow-burning dilemmas, now scream into the void. What does identity mean when time no longer leaves a mark? What is legacy if no one dies? Religion gets a PR nightmare. Eternal life was their thing, and now Silicon Valley stole it. Heaven becomes less appealing when you can have a beach body and margarita forever on Earth. The Pope starts tweeting YOLO was a lie, while monks struggle to meditate knowing they'll be doing it forever. Of course, there are holdouts. Amish hipsters, radical naturalists, those who believe crow's feet are a badge of honor. They form pro-aging communes in the mountains, shunning the youth-fixated world and growing old defiantly, proudly comparing liver spots like war medals. Still, the pressure to opt out of aging is overwhelming. Beauty standards morph into something more tyrannical than ever. If you choose to age, people assume you're depressed, lazy, or worse, trying to be deep. The stigma flips. Instead of dyeing gray hair black, people dye their shiny, youthful locks gray just to appear wise in board meetings. CEOs hire aging consultants to sprinkle just the right number of laugh lines for gravitas. Every generation, now indistinguishable by face, fights for cultural space. Boomers still rule corporate boardrooms, Gen Z runs the cultural narrative, and millennials wander through it all, wondering if they're still relevant or just vintage. In the background, a darker current flows. With no aging, population growth explodes. Earth becomes more crowded than a Black Friday sale at a robot vacuum store. Cities stack upward, food supplies stretch thin, and real estate becomes the new immortality, because if you live forever, you sure as hell need a place to sit. Elon Musk begins selling condos on the moon at $400 million a square foot. In this reality, optional aging opens a Pandora's box of consequences, blessings, and bizarre TikTok trends involving 200-year-old grandmas doing backflips for clout. But this is just the beginning. What happens next is where things really get weird. So now that everyone can choose whether to age or not, the entire concept of life stages is officially obsolete. Childhood, adolescence, adulthood, retirement, they all blur into one sprawling, never-ending existence with no milestones, no finish lines, and definitely no excuse to buy yourself a sports car because you turned 50. People freeze themselves at their so-called optimal age like it's a personal brand decision. Some choose 25 for energy, others 35 for credibility, and a few bold souls lock in their look at 47 because it screams mid-career gravitas with a touch of sass. Suddenly, it is not enough to be young. You have to age strategically. Life planning seminars now include consultants who ask, what facial age best conveys your startup's mission statement? And have you considered aging 5 years to look more trustworthy to investors? The pressure to pick the right moment to stop the clock turns every mirror into a battlefield and every birthday into a referendum. But with billions choosing to freeze time, a strange stagnation sets in. Cities become eerie playgrounds of the eternally youthful. Universities are filled with students who have been freshmen for 80 years. The same influencers continue doing makeup tutorials for centuries. Musicians drop the same sound for generations because, well, their fans never age out of it. Culture stops evolving. Fashion gets stuck in loops because no one's face changes enough to demand new styles. Museums become mausoleums of a bygone time when wrinkles were allowed and denim silhouettes actually changed. Meanwhile, time continues to pass, even if people do not. The sun keeps rising, glaciers keep melting, and climate change throws a tantrum that not even eternal youth can avoid. That beach body you preserved at 28? It is now radioactive thanks to solar flare intensity that SPF 2000 cannot handle. Immortals begin to realize that cheating age does not mean cheating consequences. The Earth, after all, did not sign up for this. Population density grows more unbearable. In cities like New Delhi, Lagos, Sao Paulo, and Tokyo, buildings scrape the stratosphere. People live in vertical megastructures called life towers, crammed into pods the size of walk-in closets. Urban airspace becomes so congested with delivery drones and hover cars that birds go extinct from sheer confusion. Nations panic. Immigration becomes a zero-sum game as no one leaves and no one dies. Global leaders try to introduce the concept of retirement relocation to Mars, which is really just a polite way of saying, please go somewhere else before we drown in each other's immortality. Meanwhile, democracy faces an existential crisis. Voting blocs calcify. Centuries-old voters refuse to change their minds, and since no one ages out of the electorate, political gridlock becomes eternal. Presidents cling to office for 120 years until their handlers have to stage interventions. Campaign slogans shift from hope and change to eternal stability through indefinite youth. The judiciary turns into a Supreme Court of forever, where justices hand down rulings for 3 straight centuries because they're still spry and their cholesterol is perfect. Naturally, crime evolves. With lifespans uncapped, prison sentences become meaningless. Life sentence now sounds like a vacation. Some criminals stuck in legal limbo negotiate plea deals where they agree to age 10 years as punishment. Aging becomes currency. You want a loan? Pledge 5 years of natural aging. Need to atone for tax fraud? Serve time by voluntarily developing crow's feet. A black market emerges for aging, with brokers dealing in gray hair follicles and authentic stretch marks. Society invents a new underclass, the chronopoor, those who aged too early before the tech arrived and now walk among the eternally young like living fossils. They demand dignity, representation, and discounts at restaurants where their servers are technically 140 years younger than them but look the same. The result is a bizarre cultural reckoning. Chronoism becomes a word. Age-shaming lawsuits flood the courts. Gray pride parades sweep major cities as people demand visibility for their laugh lines and sunspots. Movements rise up preaching let time in and age with honor. But youth culture will not go quietly. They counter-protest with holograms, slogans like wrinkles kill vibes, and weaponized memes of sagging faces rendered in Ultra HD. Amid this chaos, mortality starts looking nostalgic. There's a growing cult of the finite, people who willingly choose to age, decline, and die. They see beauty in the arc of a finite life, the urgency, the transformation, the soft surrender to time. They speak in poetry, live in monasteries, and are treated by the immortals like fascinating lunatics. Some even start dying on purpose, just to remind the world that endings once mattered. Philosophers resurface as rock stars. Finally, someone wants to hear them out again. Their TED Talks titled things like Death, Humanity's Greatest App, and without a deadline, nothing gets done, go viral. People begin to ask uncomfortable questions. If we never die, how do we know when to stop? How do we forgive ourselves? How do we let go? These questions simmer, unspoken but heavy, in the eyes of those who look 25 but feel 400. In this world where aging is optional, everyone appears frozen in time, but inside, the weight of eternity is starting to show, and the cracks are beginning to form. In this strange new world where crow's feet are a lifestyle choice and birthdays are just numerical trivia, people begin to experience something unexpected: exhaustion. Not physical fatigue, of course. Everyone's cardiovascular health is peak, their bone density excellent, their skin a triumph of cellular engineering. No, it's a deeper weariness, the kind that creeps in when you have seen the same sunrise 10,000 times and no longer care whether the sun is rising or setting. Eternal youth turns out to be alarmingly boring. The once glamorous promise of endless vitality becomes a psychological maze where every hallway leads to deja vu. Relationships lose their urgency. Why bother resolving an argument when you have centuries to fix it? Romantic passion withers under the weight of infinite chances. Couples stay together for 150 years and then break up over who gets custody of the vintage record collection from 2093. Marriage vows are rewritten. I promise to love you until I forget why, or until we mutually agree that monogamy is cute but optional after the first 100 years. Friendship groups ossify. Cliques from the early 21st century still exist, arguing about bands that have not released music since the invention of teleportation. High school reunions become monthly support groups held in cryospas where people compare how many exes they have outlived emotionally rather than physically. Meanwhile, memory becomes a real estate crisis. The human brain, despite all upgrades, can only store so much. After 300 years, people begin purging memories like old files on a clogged hard drive. You must now choose which parts of your life to remember. Want to recall your first kiss? You might have to delete your mother's laugh. Want to remember what a tree smells like in autumn? Say goodbye to the names of your children. Digital memory backups are offered, but they come with monthly subscription fees and the risk of hacking. Memory ransomware becomes a thing. Hackers lock your entire adolescence behind a paywall, demanding a decade's worth of emotional trauma in return. Some people pay. Others let it go. The past becomes negotiable. Collective history phrase. With so many people forgetting selectively, the truth itself becomes fluid. Did that war really happen? Did that movement really change the world? Was that politician ever beloved or just heavily memed? Historical consensus collapses into conspiracy soup. Museums no longer display facts. They host debates about what people think might have maybe happened, possibly. And then, of course, comes the economy. Retirement is dead, obviously. But so is ambition. With no aging, promotions lose meaning. There is no urgency to succeed when you have infinite time to climb the ladder, fall off, and climb again. Employees stay in the same job for centuries, gradually turning into bureaucratic liches who hoard office supplies and whisper ancient HR policies in the break room. Startups stagnate because their founders refuse to pivot, confident that the market will come back around eventually, which it does, every 112 years. Capitalism, having run out of tricks, reinvents itself through decay tokens, a new digital currency where aging yourself slightly increases your social and financial capital. People start selling laugh lines like NFTs. Own a wrinkle from the influencer who cried during the third Great Recession of 2146. Meanwhile, advertisers pivot. Anti-aging products become obsolete, replaced by age augmentation serums that help you look just slightly older, because now a hint of maturity is rare and therefore aspirational. Fashion brands launch vintage facewear that mimics the aesthetic of wisdom. Models with realistic under-eye bags become the new icons of authenticity. Magazines run headlines like 50 is the new 30, and 30 is now socially irresponsible. On the fringes of society, artists and philosophers revolt. They declare youth tyranny. Art movements like wrinklism and decay chic explode in popularity. Sculptors make statues that deliberately crumble. Painters use rust and mold as mediums. Music is once again performed live and imperfectly because auto-tune immortality has robbed art of its soul. But the mainstream clings to the glossy aesthetic of youth. No one wants to look like they have lived a real life. They just want to appear curated, eternal, and algorithmically palatable. This war between authenticity and eternity rages silently in cafes, on social feeds, and in the eyes of people who have not cried in decades because they are not sure what sadness even feels like anymore. And beneath it all, mortality waits, not defeated, just paused. Because the thing about time is, it always wins eventually. Even if you freeze your skin, clone your organs, and reprogram your cells, something deeper is still counting down. The soul, perhaps, or consciousness, or the quiet longing to simply finish the story. In this world of ageless bodies and endless boredom, people begin to whisper again about the beauty of a life that ends. Not out of despair, but out of a rediscovered awe for the fragile, fleeting miracle of being alive just once. A few brave souls opt out of the system. They start to age, deliberately. They embrace the creases, the aches, the slowness. And when they die, something unexpected happens. People cry, not because it was a tragedy, but because it was beautiful. The movement spreads quietly at first, like a whispered rumor in a cathedral. They call themselves the finite. Not a cult, though of course they are branded as one by the tabloids, but a philosophy, a choice. In a world where death is optional, choosing it becomes the ultimate rebellion. Members of the finite begin staging public aging ceremonies, rituals where participants reintroduce senescence to their cells, slowly letting time do what it was once destined to do. They gather in parks, temples, even luxury malls. They wear white robes with gold thread wrinkles sewn into the sleeves. It is all deeply poetic and deeply unnerving to the immortal elite who watch these events like one might watch a forest fire from inside a climate-controlled bunker. The ceremonies are quiet, contemplative. A participant kneels, injects a compound that reverses the cellular immortality modifications, and begins the slow march back into age. Hair grays, eyes dim, knees start to crackle like nostalgic vinyl. And the crowd, mostly ageless onlookers, reacts with an emotion they had not felt in a very long time, envy. Not because they want to die, but because they miss meaning. Because in a world where nothing ends, nothing truly begins. Aging, with all its mess and grief and aching dignity, offers something no algorithm, no biotech miracle, no digital consciousness upload can simulate: consequence. And consequence is the crucible of humanity. Suddenly, art becomes raw again. The finite create works that reflect the temporariness of everything. The sandcastle symphonies, the biodegradable paintings, the 6-month novels written in erasable ink. Concerts are held once and never repeated. Lovers tattoo each other's names not in ink but in scars because they want the marks to fade as their memories do. The media reacts first with mockery, then with curiosity, and finally with monetization. Talk shows invite the finite to share their stories, their wrinkles, their regrets. Corporations launch graceful decline experiences where the rich can simulate what it feels like to age without actually doing it. Virtual dementia becomes an art installation in Berlin. Influencers post selfies with artificial liver spots and caption them #mortality vibes. The whole thing teeters between profound and performative, but some take it seriously. Governments, seeing the political potential, begin to legislate death rights, allowing people to schedule their own final days with bureaucratic flair. Forms are filed. Confetti is optional. Tax breaks are offered to those who choose to age, under the pretense of biological diversity preservation. Schools begin offering history classes again, not just as optional background data, but as lived context. Teachers are reintroduced as old people, actual old people, wrinkled, slow-moving, wise in a way no AI assistant could ever replicate. Children who had only known age as adults sit in wide-eyed silence as someone with a creaky voice tells them what thunder used to sound like before weather control. Families rediscover something they had lost: lineage. When you live forever, your ancestors become irrelevant. But when aging returns, even selectively, so too does the sense of coming from somewhere, of being part of a chain rather than a floating, self-updating cloud file. The finite have grandchildren who watch them weaken and die and feel the strange golden ache of grief. And with grief comes empathy. And with empathy, community. The cultural pendulum swings. Youth becomes passé. The new icons are those who wear time like a well-earned jacket. Laugh lines become status symbols. Books like The Dignity of Decay top the bestseller list. Anti-aging clinics quietly pivot to elegant deterioration services, marketing customized arthritis and bespoke cataracts for the ultra-wealthy who want to feel something real. But not everyone is on board. The ageless, as they are now called, view the finite with suspicion. They argue that aging is regression, that death is wasteful, that choosing obsolescence is a slap in the face to centuries of scientific progress. Political parties form around these identities, the timeless versus the mortalist. Campaign slogans include "Forever Forward" and "Let Life End." The debates are fierce and philosophical. Is a life longer inherently better? Does suffering serve a purpose? What is the point of love, ambition, kindness when you have infinite time to practice them? Are you really generous if you can give forever? Are you brave if there is no risk? The world splits not violently, not yet, but in tone. Cities develop personalities. Some embrace the finite, where you can smell the scent of age in the air and hear laughter that trembles. Others remain bastions of eternal youth, where every sidewalk feels algorithmically generated and the people smile like profile pictures that never update. In some regions, age is taboo again. In others, it is sacred. And somewhere in the dusty corner of a forgotten temple, or maybe just a grandmother's cluttered attic, there lies an old photograph. A real one with creases and fading edges, of a woman who chose to grow old. Her smile is imperfect, her hair wild with silver, and her eyes, they carry something neither the ageless nor the algorithmically preserved will ever fully understand: the gravity of goodbye. And that, at last, begins to pull the world back towards something astonishingly familiar. An existence that matters not because it lasts, but because it ends. Not everyone ages by choice. In fact, the vast majority still cling to the comfort of eternity. And why wouldn't they? In an era where every illness is preventable, every mistake reversible, every heartbreak patchable by neural therapy, who would voluntarily return to the chaos of entropy? But the trouble with eternity is boredom. Trouble with eternity is boredom. Not the idle kind you feel in waiting rooms or dull meetings, but a deep cellular fatigue. A weariness born not from exertion, but from the unshakable knowledge that nothing truly matters if there is always more time. For the ageless, relationships become experiments. Careers become costumes. History becomes a trivia game played between reruns of the same perfectly optimized breakfast. Marriage vows shift subtly from "till death do us part" to "until one of us gets algorithmically incompatible." Some swap partners every century like you would update a phone plan. Others curate endless solo decades to work on themselves, only to emerge into a society that has changed just enough to make them obsolete. But the finite change that. They inject meaning back into the mix like a strong espresso poured into a lake of lukewarm immortality. Their children grow. Their spouses grieve. Their stories end and are told. And suddenly the ageless begin to envy again. Not youth, but urgency. A few start to dabble in artificial scarcity. They rent out aging experiences like tourists trying on cultural costumes. They buy limited-time memories, rent 5-year friendships, and even engage in seasonal dying retreats where participants simulate a fatal illness and recover for the Enlightenment. Therapists call it existential role play. Economists call it meaning as a service. The finite naturally scoff, but their message continues to ripple. Universities now offer mortality studies. Artists trained in timeless perfection begin to explore imperfection, paintings that blur over time, songs that decay like cassette tapes. Writers pen novels that self-destruct after one reading. The once scoffed at phrase YOLO returns not ironically, but reverently. Cultural products shift. Immortal protagonists are passé. The biggest film of the decade, The Last Embrace, tells a story of a man who chooses to age alongside the woman he loves, refusing rejuvenation so their wrinkles can form in tandem. Critics call it the most human story in 300 years. The ageless begin to fracture. Some double down, joining communes where aging is banned and the scent of decay is scrubbed from every surface. Others break ranks, choosing to reintroduce time into their lives, unsure whether they are courageous or just curious. Governments panic, as they always do when people start making their own choices. The Ministry of Health issues warnings about unapproved senescence therapies. Biotech corporations lobby to restrict pro-aging chemicals, claiming they're harmful to GDP. Insurance firms quietly update their policies to penalize people who choose to die. But suppressing death turns out to be harder than suppressing life. The finite, many of whom are now visibly aging, march peacefully through the streets of cities built for the ageless. Their signs read, "Time is not a disease, let me leave, and beauty is brevity." A viral video shows a wrinkled woman gently touching the cheek of her ageless daughter, whispering, "You will never know how precious time is until you lose it." The clip sparks a global outcry, and then the unthinkable happens. A prominent world leader, ageless, genetically perfected, face smoother than a hologram, announces she will age. On live broadcast, she administers the reversal compound. Over the next weeks, her skin changes. Her voice roughens. Her movement slow. She speaks of legacy, of wanting her grandchildren to see her as human, not just as permanent. Her approval ratings skyrocket. Some call it performative, but millions follow. The world's aesthetic slowly transforms. Advertising, once obsessed with eternal youth, now glorifies character. Wrinkles become fashionable. Liver spots get stylized names like time freckles. People queue not for stem cell treatments, but to hear live stories from 90-year-olds with visible arthritis and impeccable timing. But the transition is not smooth. The black market erupts with counterfeit aging kits, some causing rapid degeneration, others locking people in grotesque half-age states. Suicide rates spike among the immortals who attempt to age but cannot bear the pain. Laws are passed. Protocols revised. Age. Coaches become a booming profession, helping newly finite individuals transition into lives with limitations, aches, and irreversible choices. Support groups form, some humorous, others heartbreaking. The Age Anonymous movement spreads online with testimonials like, "Hi, I'm Jordan. I gave up cellular immortality 3 years ago. I just lost my first tooth in 2 centuries. It was beautiful." As humans learn to die again, they rediscover how to live. Scarcity makes joy richer, sorrow deeper. Dinner tables echo not with optimized conversations, but with awkward, unfiltered truths. People forgive faster, love harder, dream bigger, not because they have time, but because they do not. Funerals return. So do eulogies. And suddenly, cemeteries are no longer relics of a forgotten age, but gardens of meaning. The soil becomes sacred. Flowers planted there hold not just memory, but purpose. In one such cemetery, a man kneels by the grave of his mother, a former ageless who chose to end her life on her terms. He places a hand on the stone, cracked by weather and time, and whispers, "Thank you for teaching me how to leave." The camera drone above him captures the scene, and it is broadcast to 1 million immortals watching in sterile towers who feel something they have not felt in centuries, longing. Not for more life, but for enough of it. But of course, any utopia comes with fine print in microscopic font, especially when the fountain of youth flows through syringes, nanobots, or telomerase-enhancing smoothies. As our biologically ageless population blossoms, we begin to face the uncomfortable question, what happens when no one retires because no one needs to? Picture a workforce where your boss is 143 years old, sharp as ever, with 3 centuries of corporate maneuvering behind those perpetually twinkling eyes. You, the fresh-faced 70-year-old intern, are thrilled to be given the privilege of photocopying documents, while the elder statesmen of the office reminisce about surviving the great USB data crash of 2094. Career progression becomes a myth, a bedtime story told by exhausted middle-aged parents to their century-old toddlers. Forget climbing the corporate ladder. At best, you get to polish the bottom rung once in a while. But work is just one element of the post-aging headache. Think about marriage. "Till death do us part" used to sound poetic. Now it is a legal liability. If both partners live to be 300, statistically speaking, you're going to have 17 midlife crises, 9 separate hobby phases involving lizards, and at least 4 radically different identities, including a brief stint as a Martian beat poet. How do you stay committed to someone whose idea of romantic spontaneity involves taking you to the planetarium on Jupiter's 3rd moon? The concept of forever gets real weird when forever is literal. And then there is reproduction. Without death, the math does not work. Babies are adorable, sure, but not when they are arriving at a global rate of 4 per second, and no one ever leaves the stage. By year 2200, we would be knee-deep in toddlers, with entire cities converted into daycare centers, and 90% of the global economy devoted to manufacturing juice boxes and anti-spill sippy cups. Governments, desperate to control the birth rate, will resort to measures more dramatic than any dystopian sci-fi film ever dared propose. Lottery systems for procreation rights, tax incentives to stay celibate, baby-making permits auctioned off to the highest bidder on blockchain marketplaces called Cradlecoin. And yes, let us not forget the real estate crisis. With no one dying, housing becomes a Darwinian sport. You want a 2-bedroom apartment in Manhattan? Get in line behind the 217-year-old great-grandmother who has owned it since Roosevelt was a surname and not just a trivia answer. She is not moving, ever. She has got emotional ties to that bathtub grout. The rich, as always, will circumvent the inconvenience of population density by building floating palaces over the Pacific or renting small islands to use as vacation closets. Meanwhile, the rest of us adapt by bunking in pods so tight we develop intimate relationships with our own kneecaps. And of course, there is the philosophical horror lurking behind every rejuvenated smile. What does it mean to live when life no longer has a deadline? Do our achievements matter more or less when we have centuries to rack up accomplishments? If you can keep failing forever, does success ever truly taste sweet? Or does it become a bland inevitability like watching a sitcom rerun with slightly different haircuts? The burden of choice becomes suffocating. Every day you wake up to infinite possibilities and infinite expectations. Learn a language, get another degree, finally write that novel, train for the Intergalactic Olympics, attend your 112th high school reunion, and pretend you still remember Becky from biology, even though she has been genetically modified to resemble an androgynous jellyfish. Eternity does not feel like freedom. It feels like cosmic homework. And so, somewhere between the wrinkle-free faces and the endless opportunities, the sheen of immortality starts to tarnish. The glossy ads for ageless living never mention the spiritual numbness that creeps in when birthdays lose all meaning and centuries blur together like indistinguishable Thursday afternoons. After a while, time becomes noise, just an endless hum in the background of your existence. You stop asking, what do I want to do with my life? And start asking, how many lives do I need to make this century feel worth it? With aging optional, identity becomes fluid to the point of absurdity. You are not just reinventing yourself every decade. You're recycling personas like outfits, trying on philosophies, hobbies, and even political ideologies like hats. Today, you are a minimalist Zen poet who only eats moss. Next year, you are a crypto-anarchist skydiving evangelist with a flamethrower license. The year after that, a bonsai sculptor with strong opinions on Martian pop music. Personality becomes performance art because permanence no longer holds power. Traditions decay. Rituals vanish. When no one ages, rites of passage lose their purpose. Bar mitzvahs become nostalgic cosplay. Coming-of-age films are remade as historical fiction. Retirement parties are hosted ironically by 30-year-olds who plan to work through the next ice age. And somewhere in all this societal drift, a strange new class of humans emerges, those who choose to age. They are viewed with a mix of awe and suspicion. Why would anyone voluntarily grow old when the alternative is eternal youth and carbon fiber hip replacements? But for them, mortality is a form of meaning. They argue that life has value precisely because it ends. They seek purpose in the arc, the decline, the finale. Some live like monks, letting nature take its course. Others document their deterioration on social media, earning millions of followers and lucrative deals as authenticity influencers. The age choosers, as they are known, become symbols of rebellion against the flat infinity of the ageless elite. Entire subcultures rise around them, movements that celebrate wrinkles as wisdom, gray hair as heritage, and memory loss as the price of a rich, fully spent existence. Naturally, the biotech corporations are not thrilled. Aging has become bad branding. Billions are spent on PR campaigns trying to portray senescence as a malfunction, an error to be corrected, a virus to be eliminated. But against this narrative, the age choosers raise a quiet protest. Not with megaphones, but with time-lapse diaries. Not with riots, but with gravestones etched with poetry. They do not see themselves as tragic. They see themselves as complete. Meanwhile, for the rest of society, time is no longer an adversary, but an eternal roommate, sometimes comforting, sometimes irritating, always present. Religion shifts too. After all, when you can live forever, the promise of an afterlife seems less urgent. Some faiths collapse entirely, replaced by neo-spiritual movements that worship entropy, novelty, or even boredom. Others adapt, offering salvation not from death, but from meaninglessness. Heaven is rebranded as a final destination you reach not by dying, but by finally choosing to stop. Because in this world, death becomes not a failure of biology, but a philosophical decision. The ultimate mic drop. And still, the biggest twist in this timeline where aging is optional is not the biotechnology itself, nor the immortality of celebrity influencers trapped in eternal youth selling mushroom-based skincare. No, the real upheaval is philosophical. Because when you are no longer dragged forward by the biological conveyor belt of time, when your body stops reminding you of its impermanence, you are left utterly alone with your choices. What do you do when you can be anything forever? In a world without natural expiration dates, ambition mutates. The classic narrative arc of life, learn, grow, achieve, retire, die, is replaced by endless loops of reinvention and fatigue. You do not just change careers, you abandon entire industries like old lovers. Relationships become paradoxical. Marriage vows like "until death do us part" are quietly dropped in favor of couples sign century-long contracts with renewable clauses. And there is a booming market for memory editing to soften old heartbreaks or erase them entirely if they start to stink up your fifth marriage. Children, once seen as the next generation, become lifestyle accessories for the eternally young. Parenting apps help you raise them quickly, efficiently, and with just the right touch of vintage nostalgia. But having children loses its urgency. Why procreate when you have infinite time to find yourself? And so global birth rates collapse, not out of crisis, but out of choice. Cities hollow out and repurpose themselves as retreats for the ever-young techno-meditation centers in former finance districts, endless silent discos in what used to be shopping malls. Meanwhile, the economy, the poor, confused economy, keeps reinventing itself to stay relevant. With people working for centuries, retirement plans become jokes, pensions obsolete, skills become disposable. You learn quantum computing in your first career, artisanal butter sculpting in your second, and possibly go whispering by your ninth. Education becomes a subscription model. You pay monthly to keep your brain updated like firmware. Governments struggle with this new longevity. How do you govern a population that lives forever but votes every 4 years? Political parties become dynastic. Their leaders immortal in both a literal and metaphorical sense. Revolutions fizzle not from suppression but from apathy. After all, why overthrow the system now when you can wait 2 centuries for a better time? War changes too. Soldiers do not die young. They pause, regenerate, and return to the battlefield with smarter armor and deeper grudges. Peacekeeping becomes therapy, not diplomacy. And art, once driven by the urgency of mortality, descends into indulgence. Novels now span volumes so thick they require neural implants just to comprehend. Musicians release symphonies that last entire decades. Painters create single canvases they add to once every decade, slowly layering eternity into brushstrokes. Somewhere in all this, the human spirit wrestles with its newfound elasticity. Some call it liberation. Others call it spiritual paralysis. There are suicides, not from despair but from exhaustion. People tired not of pain, but of options. Death cults arise, not preaching violence, but the ecstasy of finality. To them, choosing to age and eventually die is the only true act of rebellion left. Because in a world where time has no claws, the only remaining power lies in choosing when to let go. Not everyone agrees. A faction of radical eternalists launches a movement called Forever Forward, advocating for the total elimination of death from human consciousness. They build archives of preserved identities, dreaming of reloading them into future bodies like software. For them, identity is data. Death is a glitch. Meaning is maintenance. But for the rest of us, those stumbling through an endless present with fading curiosity, the question becomes heavier with each passing century. If you could live forever, would you still live fully? Or would you, like a song left on loop too long, start to sound like noise? So here we are at the edge of forever. Humanity has beaten the most ancient of foes, time itself, and emerged victorious, albeit blinking and confused like a dog that finally caught the car. With aging rendered optional, death demoted to a lifestyle choice, and memory turned into something you manage with cloud storage, the very concept of being human has undergone a metamorphosis so profound that even Kafka might have winced. But in this final analysis, we are left with a question that no gene therapy or quantum CRISPR can edit out. What now? When nothing pushes you forward, no ticking clock, no closing doors, no decay gnawing at your marrow, what do you do with your endless today? For some, the answer is transcendence. A new spirituality blooms, not one of gods and heavens, but of self-curated transcendence. People design inner universes, entire dreamscapes they can live in, swapping reality for rendered euphoria. Meditation becomes a lifelong vocation. Digital monks walk the earth, heads filled with artificial eternities, uninterested in anything outside their own engineered bliss. For others, the answer is hedonism. If the end never comes, then why not savor every pleasure without restraint? Planetary indulgence hits new heights. Oceans become floating festivals. Deserts bloom with mirage cities of sensation. Crime changes form. Murder loses its sting when victims can be rebooted. Now the worst thing you can do to someone is delete their backups. Entire legal systems evolve to manage these digital souls, with lawyers debating the metaphysics of corrupted consciousness. And then there are the wanderers, the ones who drift not through countries but centuries. They never settle. They never stop. They sample eras like flavors, identities like outfits. They are loved briefly, forgotten slowly, remembered strangely. They write their memoirs in volumes so vast that no one reads them but the author. Yet for all this infinite diversity, one problem persists like a bad line of code, the meaning of life. Because when life no longer ends, it must be infused with meaning constantly. Without death to sharpen its edges, life risks becoming one long blur of lukewarm novelty. Purpose becomes the new currency. People trade it, sell it, hoard it. Motivational gurus peddle handcrafted existential quests. Find your purpose plan, just 3 monthly payments, and we'll deliver a reason to live right to your cortex. But behind the laughter, behind the satire, is a quiet truth humming like a submarine beneath the surface. Optional aging has not made us gods. It has made us mirrors, endless and recursive, reflecting back our deepest hopes and fears without mercy. And so, in this world where aging is no longer a sentence but a decision, some choose to grow old on purpose. Not because they must, but because they want to feel time again, its weight, its gifts, its soft warnings. They want to see wrinkles appear like tree rings, reminders that life is not just about living longer, but about deepening. And these people, these self-made mortals, become the storytellers. They age, they die, and in doing so, they teach us something that no gene sequence ever could. That meaning is not found in how long we live, but in how fully we dare to. Thank you for joining this journey on What If Horizons, where the futures we imagine say more about who we are now than who we might become. If this episode made you pause, smile, or contemplate your own clock, consider subscribing, sharing, and letting us know what world you want us to bend next. Until then, remember, just because you can live forever does not mean you should.